Welcome back, everyone, to Ruminations podcast, where I'll be discussing topics of interest and intrigue and mystery, all on this quest to achieve authentic story making. Now, my logo I put at the beginning with the candle, the Ruminations podcast logo that I developed, I chose that because, to me, ruminations, this word that means to think deeply over a topic, to chew the cud. That's where that saying, that's where that word comes from, is that saying. And to me, it just has that same sound of illuminations. And so to ruminate over something, the correct way is to do it in the illumination of truth, of God's word. And that's what I try to do in all of my ruminating topics, is stay true to the truth and to discover the deeper layers behind reality and all these things that then tie into authentic story making. So today I have a variety of topics to go over. Opening it up first, I'd like to talk about the idea of developing style and talk about what I am trying to work towards to achieve with my style and the inspiration, the authors and writings that I have found to be, to me, the best and the ones that I want to kind of pattern after. So you kind of divide style into two main categories: descriptions, or the most popular word, prose, and dialogue. So to start it off, probably my favorite prose style is very much akin to that classic, The Lord of the Rings, surprise, surprise. See, Tolkien had such a way with descriptiveness and choosing the right words that evoked the right feel and mood for a certain scene. So Tolkien is one of the ones that I'm going to try and loosely draw from to develop my own personal style, and combining his with another author who I think he might have even been a little bit of a contemporary of Tolkien, maybe a little later, but he wrote historical fiction. He wrote historical books on historical, I think it's actually more nonfiction, sorry. So Harold Lamb, he was well known for writing historical books in a very engaging way, but it was actually nonfiction. So to give an example, his book, Iron Men and Saints, which is on the Crusades, one of his opening chapters, to build the idea and feel of the world at the time of the First Crusade, and it was known as the Dark Ages. And he opened up his chapter on that with just a very engaging and well-painted picture. To me, this description that I'm going to read quick for you just captured my attention when I first read it, and it made me just see this world, these dark ages, and get a really good feel for it. And it was just full of that mysterious quality and just the wildness of the world at that time. So he wrote in his chapter called Darkness, "The damp forests were there as before, and the gray ruins where owls glided from the vines. The wolves hunted in packs as usual. Only small patches of land were cultivated in stony ground near the hamlets. Clay and stone huts, roofed with thatch, clustered below the hewn logs of a lord's hall and a stone tower. Cowherders slept by the beasts in the outer fields, and sheep crowded the narrow forest trails. Here and there could be seen the white dust and broken stones of a Roman road. Sometimes a Jew passed along the high road with his pack horse, or a merchant with his guard of spearmen. More rarely, a cavalcade of a baron, a master, raised the dust, and the men in the fields thronged around to stare at the powerful chargers and the dark oiled chainmail and fur-edged cloaks. Few of them ever saw more than this, except perhaps the great cross where the roads met at the end of their valley. What lay beyond the hills was unknown and hostile. Only the black-robed monks wandering barefoot from abbey to abbey could give them news of the outer world, or a rare troubadour hastening to the hall for his dinner. The men of the Dark Age often were buried in the valley of their birth without having seen any other, and they labored without ceasing. So when I read that chapter, it just made that world come alive to me, that time of history. Just the way it was worded, a lot of times very simply worded, but the right words. And what he was able to do with the right words is evoke, in other words, my mind automatically started painting these pictures off of a simple word like dark oiled chainmail and fur-lined cloaks. To me, it's a very short description, but just off of that, I'm envisioning this whole entourage of riders, knights along this, dark forest trail, and just the whole big scene of that. And I could hear the sounds of the hooves on the old Roman road. I could see, the texture in the garments, all these things that just come together, just being evoked in my mind based on a simple, understandable description, but it's not an overdone description. See, I think that's one of the important things in prose and choosing the right tools for how we are going to describe certain elements. A lot of times there are very overdone. They were good at one point, but they're now very overdone descriptions. Like one example I read in a book talking about this topic, a writer's journal kind of book. And he was saying, the idea of describing someone's eyes as limpid pools, and his time had become just this very overdone analogy. It was probably really cool when it was first used, but then there's the other side of the spectrum where things are overused, or overflowered, overdone in words. There's just so much, and you lose sight of the forest for the trees, as the old saying goes. In other words, there's just so much to the description that you kind of get lost, and the words are a little too flowery and you don't even know what they mean anyway. So how can you picture something that you don't know what it means? So those are some important things I think Harold Lamb and Tolkien has done very well, and something I want to study more and read more of their works and kind of get a feel for how to accomplish that in my own writing. And another tool that goes along with that, and this is my favorite tool for descriptive writing, for showing something versus telling something, for helping to evoke certain things in the reader's mind and imagination. It's my favorite tool in prose, in poetry, and it is the tool of personification. So personification is putting a personality to something that innately does not have one. Say a tree doesn't have a personality, but you can write a descriptive scene that it does something that only a person would be able to do technically, like speak or listen or wave. All these things that we as people use to describe ourselves. And I think one of the reasons why that is such a powerful tool to use in a narrative is it even harkens back to being a child. And as kids, we had the best imaginations. We had the ability to see the world in such a wonderful way, full of mystery and unexplained, infinite possibilities. And a lot of that can be found in using personification. When you describe something, this thing that is inanimate in itself, but put a personality to it, that kind of recreates that same wonder upon the world as children have to a certain extent. So that's why kids' books are oftentimes putting characters into things like trees or vegetables, or, all these inanimate things. But then again, putting that into our adult fiction, our poetry, our narratives and prose, it helps to rekindle those same things and make a living, breathing world just through the way we word it. So, Tolkien, again, great example of using personification. So here is a quick example from the Two Towers book. This is talking about Fangorn Forest when Merry and Pippin are first coming up to it and when they escape from the Uruk-hai. So it says, "Even as he spoke, the dark edge of the forest loomed up straight before them. Night seemed to have taken refuge under its great trees, creeping away from the coming dawn." So that is such a engaging way by putting a personification on the darkness and the nighttime, creeping away from the coming of dawn and hiding and taking refuge under the shadow of the great trees. It just, through that simple description, personification, it just adds so much layers of depth that can be drawn out without even having to do a lot of work as the reader. It just evokes the right feelings and images in the mind, kind of effortlessly. That's the powerful tool of personification in my mind. And along with that, evocation. So in other words, reading something simple, as I said before, and having this whole layered depth of a scene come into your mind just effortlessly. So reading, like I said, oiled chainmail and fur-lined cloaks and just this entourage, this whole busy, packed scene where you can feel and see and smell a lot of times just from the simple scene. So another book that this one word has always stuck with me, a Stephen Lawhead book. I think it was in his first series. I don't know if it was his first series, but his first kind of fantasy fiction medieval series, the Dragon King trilogy. And one of the opening scenes, as a character's coming into it, it's setting the mood, and there's this raven, and it says overhead, basically, a raven feathered the wind. And just using that one phrase, to me, it even carries a sound to it. It carries an imagery to it. So because it's something that I already know, a bird, and it's, maybe it's trying the wind with its wings up, and the wind is brushing through its feathers. It's feathering the wind. It's feeling it out. But you can almost hear the sound of the feathers even in that simple description. And it just evokes this whole mood again, in the sounds and the sights. So those are the most powerful tools in writing style, I feel like. And those are the things that I'm going to be working on as I'm writing my new story, perfecting my style. Now, caveat to that, first draft is not necessarily the place to worry about that so much. That is very true. I think I will be experimenting and doing my best to add those things in as I'm writing the first draft, because I feel like that even helps me as I'm writing it. But a lot of those things will come in the editing stage. It will definitely have its place. So that's the caveat to, obviously, first draft writing. But developing style just comes with writing. So it will come through the first draft and working it out and trying things out, but not spending too much time and getting bogged down, because I think the first draft is where the most important emphasis is just on getting the adventure out, enjoying the adventure of it. So personification, evocation, two of my favorites. Let's see, I think I'm going to read a C.S. Lewis quote. He talked also, and he is another one that, to me, especially having just read the Space Trilogy, he was a master of choosing the right word to evoke an entire scene off of. And he wrote about it to younger writers. Let's see. So he said, "It is no use telling us that something was mysterious or loathsome or awe-inspiring or voluptuous. Do you think your readers will believe you just because you say so? You must go quite a different way to work. By direct description, by metaphor and simile, by secretly evoking powerful associations, by offering the right stimuli to our nerves in the right degree and the right order, and by the very beat and vowel melody and length and brevity of your sentences, you must bring it about that we the readers, not you the writer, exclaim, 'How mysterious,' or 'loathsome,' or whatever it is. Let me taste for myself, and you'll have no need to tell me how I should react to the flavor." That is a perfect summing up of what it means to evoke through writing. And I am as guilty of this as anyone else, saying, he was mad, he was happy, the hills were green, all these just very obviously stated ways. But there's the right way to evoke the right emotion, the right feeling in the readers. And it's actually beneficial to both the writer and the reader because it's less work for both. The writer, the more effort you have to put into a long, drawn-out description to try and capture just the right thing that you're saying, is also going to make the reader have to read this much longer paragraph and try and dig through it all and try and figure out what the reader's saying. Whereas if you can just boil it down, use the right word, and so in other words, a lot less effort of writing as many words as possible for the writer, and then the reader has less to try and boil down in their mind as they're reading. And if it's the right words, without the effort, those things, those pictures are going to just spring up in their imagination. So that is something I'm really hoping that I can achieve. And again, it's all part of the quest, the journey to becoming a good writer. So that is on prose. Now there is also dialogue. That is another big part. And again, Tolkien is pretty good on dialogue, but it's a little bit more archaic, which I do like to a certain extent. But Stephen Lawhead, to me, has really captured the art of dialogue, being easy to follow and being realistic, but also even outside the dialogue, like the dialogue tags. I feel like Lord of the Rings was written at a time, usually it's just using the word said almost every time after someone says something, and it just says, this character said, this character answered. And it was very simple. But Lawhead has, to me, inspired me to be able to add on these dialogue tags that add a whole lot more layer to what is simply being said. So maybe it'll be expounded upon. The character says something and makes a facial expression as this dialogue tag. And it adds this whole new layer to what is being said and how it's being said. So instead of, and it's in a way that is evoking the right, it's being shown rather than told. So say the character said angrily, that's just telling it. As C.S. Lewis said, how are we just going to take your word for that he's saying this angrily? Show us it instead. So maybe this character said, as the red rose up in his cheeks, as he felt the heat build around his throat. All these different ways. I'm just going off the top of my head, but again, Lawhead is probably the one that I will draw from as I'm working on developing my own dialogue tag style and how things are said. Is there anyone else? Yeah, I think he's the best one. There's a lot of other writers that I have really enjoyed, and I think they've done a pretty good job at it too, especially the more contemporary writers today. I feel like they're going to be probably the easiest to follow in dialogue because it's the closest to the way we talk now. And to a certain extent, I feel like there's a lot of debate as to including and building how characters should talk to their culture. And I think it's important to develop the dialogue that paints a feel for the culture, but also isn't overdone so that it's just hard to follow and it's just too different. So there's a balance there. But I feel like, for me, right now, Stephen R. Lawhead has been a very good example for the correct way to do it and the way I think I'd like to pattern after and draw from. So prose and dialogue, building a style. If you guys want to comment below and tell me what your favorite style is, what authors have been the best writers to you, and who has been able to evoke through their style the easiest for you, and whose writing style has stuck with you the best, and what books have encapsulated that for you. I'd love to hear. Now, again, as I said about not worrying about this so much in your rough draft, your first draft that you write, to a certain extent, you don't want to spend too much time making sure your style is perfect, because that's going to come through editing. You want to practice it as you're writing your first draft. But as C.S. Lewis in his Space Trilogy did so well, Tolkien actually commented on his Space Trilogy, and he said of it that the Space Trilogy had for the more intelligent reader a great number of philosophical and mythical implications that enormously enhanced, without detracting from the surface adventure. So there's an important distinguishing there, and I think it comes with what we're focusing on during our first draft. The first draft, the most important thing to give attention to is the adventure itself, I feel like. Let your style kind of just flow as it comes, let it be what it is. And then when we go back and we work it over, that's when we give time to the deeper things about, style, choosing the right words, the right descriptions, the right dialogue tags, and building in even those philosophical ideas and whatnot that are very important to a story. But I just think it's worth saying and bearing in remembrance, especially for myself, because I have a tendency to write very slowly due to this. Write the first draft and focus solely on the adventure. If I was to go back, so this is the question that I want to cover next. If I was to go back to young Micah, first starting writing with the dreams of becoming a published author, what is the one piece of advice that I would give to myself? Or what is the one thing that I would go back and change? And this follows along with what I was just talking about, because it is so much my personality to write slow and make sure it's perfect before I move on. Make sure my style is perfect before I move on to the next chapter. But what I would go back and change or tell myself is remove that burden of creating a masterpiece right away, because it simply isn't going to happen. We have to have time to hone our craft. We have to have time to learn and perfect our style. So what I would do if I could go back and do it over is I would just focus on writing just a bunch of short stories. Just get a bunch of short stories out there, not these big long novels. Just write with no intention of publishing them, but simply to get into some adventures, get a feel for how writing works. And so that's what I would say to any of you out there who are new at writing, a young writer. And maybe the thought of publishing isn't as big a deal to you as it was for me, but I know it will hinder you if that's what you're focusing on. But if you're writing because you love to write, that's the important thing. And write as much as you can. Write short stories. Write about a lot of different characters and events. And just maybe someday one of those short stories will turn into a bigger novel that you can come in and flesh it out and actually publish. But I think that's definitely what I would change if I could go back. Yeah, experience and just getting as much writing in as you cannot be overstated. Yep, so I think that's probably going to do it for today. We're already getting over 20 minutes. I think I do want to cover one last thing, talking about Lord of the Rings and a couple books I've been reading. Just another cool element, I think, to world building that stands out to me. Is keeping sections of your world and pieces of your world, creatures or places or whatever they are, keeping certain ones unnamed and unseen. Another scene from The Lord of the Rings, from that same chapter that I read. So it's after the riders of Rohan have annihilated the Uruk-hai that had captured Merry and Pippin. And they piled the carcasses and burned them. And it makes the statement, "But the smoke of the burning rose high to heaven and was seen by many watchful eyes." So just by adding that little tag in there, it creates this very intriguing depth to the world that is out there, because there's things that are unnamed and they're unseen, but they see. And it just is adds so much mystery to that world, to Middle Earth. And another book I'm reading right now called The Crown of Eden by Thomas Williams. There's this ancient wood that has so much legend surrounding it. And a lot of times what will come up in the story is when people are traveling through, especially at night or something, and one of the travelers will warn the other, saying, to make sure you're quiet because you don't want to wake up what's out there. But that's never named and it's never always seen. Sometimes maybe there'll be a glimpse. But just adding those levels of depth to a world, I think, creates such a richness. And it's important. I read this somewhere, I think it was Lewis or Tolkien that said this, essentially. When you add in these mysteries and these almost mythological things, don't then explain them away and boil them down to, oh, but that was just a superstition of the inhabitants around that woods, or that was just something that was being misinterpreted by this people group. It really wasn't anything. It was just superstition. So it just kills instantly when you do that, the whole intrigue and mystery of it. It's important, especially in fiction. That's one of the powers of fiction, is to have an unseen, unnamed element that is no less real. So I think that's going to do it for today. Just continuing to work on my writing and try and implement all these things that I ruminate over into my writing as well. But I'm really happy you guys joined me today. I appreciate you guys commenting and liking. I love to hear your opinions on things. And, one other question, if you would not mind commenting on this. If you wouldn't mind commenting on this. Tolkien, because I'm reading through Lord of the Rings right now again, and obviously he has a lot of poetry in his narrative. To me, I love that. I love poetry, obviously done right. I love how much it can add to world building and to narrative. But I'd like to hear what you guys think, because as I'm writing, I do love to write poetry as well. And I'm just wondering what extent the popularity opinion is on adding it into a book. Do you think it shouldn't be involved in the narrative? Do you think it doesn't add anything important? Or are you like me and do you think it's really cool to have it? I don't know. Like I said, I really like it, but I want to hear what everyone else thinks on that topic. So thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time. Thursday, another writing vlog coming out, so be sure to watch for that, and we'll see you next time.